From Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio, M740.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler, hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come warm yourself by the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Targeted individuals, electronic harassment, mind control. For the full 2 hours, Derrick Robinson will be with me. He is the executive director of a human rights organization called People Against Covert, Torture, and Surveillance, or PACTS for short, PACTS International. And Derrick has been active since 2005, addressing the issues of organized stalking and remote electronic assaults. And he is standing by. And I am coming to you live from my little studio beneath the stairs. Ian Robertson is behind the big audio board back in Liberty Village. Albert is involved in some top secret excavation in the New Mexico desert near Roswell. And of course, Ryan is running our live stream from his lair. Yes, we are streaming live on YouTube tonight, the YouTube channel Strange Planet. Please help us get to 16,000 subs. Just hit that red sub button. YouTube may have demonetized us, but we still have our pride. Now, I'm not sure if you can pick this up on the webcam. My son North, who is a huge Harry Potter fan. He's read all the books, including the play, I don't know, 2-3 times each, and he's sent away on Amazon recently. And he bought me this shirt, which he insisted that I wear. Can you see that? I don't know if we can get that on the webcam. Anyway, there it is. And the idea is he bought this on Amazon for me because Dad, he says, Harry Potter had to sleep under the stairs at his mean uncle and aunt's house. And since I'm in my studio beneath the stairs, he thought this was fitting. So if you can see it, it's the Marauders Map from Harry Potter. Can you see that? Now, North told me to say this. I hope I get this right. Otherwise, he may strangle me in my sleep. But the Marauders Map is this magical document that reveals all of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And not only does it show every classroom, every hallway, every corner of the castle, but it also shows every inch of the grounds, as well as all the secret passages that are hidden within its walls and the location of every person on the grounds, which is portrayed by a dot. And it's also capable of accurately identifying each person. It's not fooled by polyjuice potions and invisibility cloaks, and even the Hogwarts ghosts are not exempt from this. The Marauders Map, the T-shirts. So thank you very much, North. All right. Now on to more serious matters. My introduction to electronic harassment, targeted individuals, came from a loyal listener of mine way back in my early days in broadcasting, Eleanor White, who is a long-time targeted individual, and she told me most of what I know about electronic harassment, torture, surveillance. She's also a long-time advocate for fellow targeted individuals. And then my next introduction happened during the taping of my old television show, The Conspiracy Show, which aired across Canada for 4 seasons on Vision TV. And I think it was season 1. We produced an episode on electronic harassment, and we flew this gentleman up to Toronto from his home in Cincinnati, Derrick Robinson. And I was struck by his sincerity and his kindness despite his decades of anguish and suffering. And since I met Eleanor and Derrick, I've been in contact with probably close to 100 people who believe they're being targeted for electronic torture, harassment, surveillance. And we're hoping to hear from some of you tonight when we open up the phone lines in the second hour. But right now, let's get Derrick Robinson in here, Executive Director of PACTS, People Against Covert, Torture, and Surveillance International. Derrick, how are you?
Hi, great, Richard. Thanks for very much for being here. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been a long time. How have you been? I guess it's probably been what, maybe close to 10 years since you and I sat down and talked for the TV show, 2010, somewhere around there. How have you been?
Right. It's been about 10 years. And things are well, and things are improving in the community since we've talked. There's a lot more activity. There's a lot more exposure to the issues, particularly since the news story about the diplomats in Cuba and China.
Yes.
Symptoms were microwave symptoms very close to our own. So we're watching closely that development. So it's very, very important story.
And for you personally, because you are a long time targeted individual, this has been going on with you for decades. How are you personally doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I would say the first 20 years were really the struggle, because I was alone and trying to deal with this huge conspiracy, this whisper campaign that was brought upon me by the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy that I had joined, and it kind of had turned on me. So for about 20 years, I kind of dealt with it and thought that I was the only person being victimized by the U.S. government. However, after the internet came along, I discovered that there was a community of other individuals who are also being victimized, and some are in very horrific ways. So there's a lot of suffering in this community, and a lot of similarities to my own suffering, but then some are going way far beyond what I'm experiencing. So we're all being victimized at some level, and it's horrendous interference in our lives, and we're trying to find solutions for that.
I would say that the vast majority of people that I've been in contact with who believe they are being targeted really have no idea why them. But you're a little different. I mentioned Eleanor White. She also comes from, I believe she was with the Army Corps of Engineers. And so right. So she believes that there's some connection there. So you believe it has something to do with your service in the Navy. Is that correct?
Well, in my case, it was directly due to my service in the U.S. Navy. So all the organized stalking and harassment started with me the last year of my enlistment while stationed at the National Security Agency at Fort Meade. So during that year, it was kind of a hassle with all the harassment going on and everything. And I was hoping that when my enlistment was up and I returned home, that everything would be good again. And of course, I discovered after a couple of days of being at home in Cincinnati that all of the stalking had followed me there. So for the next 20 years, I just kind of had to deal with it on my own there. So it was rough, I would say, psychologically. And economically, it was rough, but I managed to survive until I found the community, and then everything just instantly changed from my perspective.
Just tell me a little bit about those early days when you were being targeted. First of all, were they targeting you because of something you had seen, something that you know, or was it simply you were a guinea pig?
Well, in my case, it was persecution, and it had to do with sexual orientation. I believe that they suspected I was gay in the Navy, and they began to stalk and harass me because of that. So it was, every minute of my day was surveilled, and which complicated my interactions with other people, because they were also spreading all kinds of rumors and tales among my fellow servicemen So that kind of made things difficult, and I became sort of like a pariah in the community. It was kind of rough, and I was hoping that by the time my enlistment rolled around a year later, that perhaps that would wind up. But they were basically just getting started. And that's been, 30 years ago now. That was 1983. No, I'm sorry, on November of 82 when I left the service. And,
so nearly 40 years. That's going on 37 years. So 4 decades.
Yeah.
Now, if once you retired from the Navy, why would they continue to harass you?
Well, I couldn't understand that either, Richard. I thought, when I first discovered they had followed me home, I thought, well, maybe about 6 months and all this will wind up. But they intended, they kind of let me know that they were there for the duration. And I believe they intend to, I'm 65 years old now, and I was 28 when this started. So they intend to this campaign. They intend to have this campaign continue for the rest of my life. I believe that there'll be some type of intervention. I believe that so much is coming to the surface lately that in some way this will be discovered and all of this harassment will be stopped. So I believe that is coming, I would say within the next couple of years, because of so many developments that have happened. And it's because of the community, because we have banded together and have promoted our cause in so many areas. And in so many ways it's coming to light, and that is starting to pay off.
I'm guessing the technology has changed dramatically. Well, I'm certain of it. In the last 3.5 decades, we're not talking about crude microwave weapons. I've seen illustrations where you can turn a microwave oven into a microwave weapon. You just take the door off and you can sort of point it in a certain direction and so forth. But back in the early 80s, you mentioned that you were being surveilled. Are we talking about like remote neural monitoring, or was it something more crude back then?
Well, it started with basically the stalking and harassment, and then it gradually went to things like, they were able to access my thoughts at one point, and that was kind of traumatizing at first when I realized that had happened. And then it went to things like the voices. I could hear them talking to me, and other things like ringing in my ears. And the technology is such that if you can hear their voices, which means they have access to certain areas of your brain, and which meant that they could also see through my eyes. They had access to my visual cortex, my auditory cortex. They could speak to me, and I would hear them. They would hear my thoughts. All of our 5 senses they were able to access because of their the technology had access to certain areas of my brain that govern those activities. So all my 5 senses, they could pick up on whatever I see that whatever I saw, they saw. Whatever I could hear, they heard, and all of my thoughts were also audible to them. Even my feelings, they could even feel what I was feeling. So I was totally, completely compromised in that way.
Well, I know they've had voice-to-skull technology since the early 70s, and you can see the patents online. Clearly, that technology exists. But I didn't realize that they had remote neural monitoring that far back. We're talking nearly 40 years ago. When you realized that they could read your thoughts, how did that come about? How did you know that they could read your thoughts.
Okay, well, actually, what happened, I discovered it. I was a delivery driver, and I was out on the road. I was working for a flower shop, and I was thinking something about my boss that was not necessarily complimentary. And then when I got back to the office after delivering flowers, I noticed that people were acting, their body language was different. They were acting a little bit standoffish. And I happened to look over at the boss, and he had this sheepish grin on his face. And then I heard from one of the coworkers the exact words I was thinking out there. And it was then that I realized, oh my God, they have invaded the last bastion of privacy that I have. So that was the moment that I realized that they had accessed my thoughts.
What happened? Were you fired as a result of that?
I wasn't actually fired. It made things a little awkward at work for a while. But I was able to maintain my relationship with them cordially until they did let me go finally. And it had to do with, it probably had to do with the harassment. They had some excuse for letting me go. It was maybe a couple of months later that finally did happen. And actually, there was a patent. Now, this was back in 1980. That's about 1986 when this occurred. But actually, there was a patent that was the basis for this technology that was patented back in April of 1976. And this was an apparatus and method for remotely monitoring and altering brain waves. And it was a patent by Robert Malick. And this was, according to Robert Duncan, who was one of the scientists in our community, this is really the patent that was the basis for remote neuromonitoring and a lot of the technology, the invasive technology that we are experiencing in our community.
Has it been difficult for you to hold down a steady job?
It was when I was in the workplace from the early 80s until I left the workplace in 2009. It was extremely difficult because every day was some new challenge from my bosses. Rules would materialize out of thin air, so I'd have to constantly adjust my work activities to what was being handed down from my bosses, who were being instructed by the harassers, by the stalkers.
So, in other words, your colleagues, your employers, were part of this organized stalking. In other words, they were brought on board to just further your torment and your anguish. How are they brought on board? Are they paid?
Well, they were probably, from what I could tell, they were kind of brought in as co-conspirators, I guess you could say. They went along with the program that was laid out for me by these stalkers, by the government stalkers. Wherever I end up working, they approach the bosses, the supervisors, and say, well, this, and this is what we want you to do. And people cooperate. And so whatever they have to make my day more difficult from the stalkers, the bosses seem to cooperate rather smoothly. And in most instances, I was able to do whatever they were asking, no matter how increasingly difficult the tasks were. I did manage to survive as long as I needed to.
And when you were discharged from the Navy, I mean, did they try and fool around with your pension? I'm assuming you received a pension.
No, I was only in for 7 years, so I was not eligible for pension.
Ah. And what about family? Siblings, parents, did they attempt to sort of separate you from your family, pit your family members against you?
Yeah, I feel that at certain times they do try to co-opt family members to do things, to say things, to make relations more difficult. But I'm able to navigate my family relationships pretty well, and we're a good family, a cordial family, and it's been fine.
Excellent. That's good news. Listen, Derrick, we're going to take a time out. When we come back, we'll talk in a little bit more detail about your organization, PACTS, People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance International. Derrick Robinson, the executive director, and we'll also have some tips as well for fellow targeted individuals. My name is Richard Syrett. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show. Back with more. Stay with us.
Sometimes entire civilizations. What goes up must come down. And it lands on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
In the March edition of Zoomer Magazine.
Hey friends. Don't know if you heard the news, but the good people at YouTube arbitrarily decided to demonetize my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. Now, they claim that we are re-uploading content that doesn't belong to us, which is entirely false. I own The Conspiracy Show. Of course, I own Conspiracy Unlimited, and I own the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone. And all of those and this radio show can be found on the YouTube channel. Now, we are reapplying for reinstatement in about 30 days. I'm not sure if we'll prevail. Something tells me we won't. It seems as if YouTube is targeting programs like mine. However, I need now your support more than ever. We've taken a big financial hit by losing the monetization on YouTube. So now I need your help more than ever. I hope you'll consider becoming an official supporter of The Conspiracy Show, the YouTube channel, and my podcast, Conspiracy Unlimited. Here's what you need to do. Go to patreon.com/Strange Planet. Patreon.com/Strange Planet. And consider donating $50 a month, $20 a month, $10 a month, or whatever you feel comfortable giving. Thank you so much. I've never needed you more.
70-TRADE, 888-670-TRADE, or torontoclass.com. 888-670-TRADE, or torontoclass.com. The world is being pulled over your eyes. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To reach Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
All right, welcome back. Derrick Robinson is here, the executive director of PACTS, People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance International. And we heard those phone numbers coming back. We will take your calls at the top of the next hour, in hour 2. With Derrick, questions and comments, and we hope to hear from some targeted individuals. What are some of the other symptoms if people are sitting here listening and thinking, wow, could I be a targeted individual? You mentioned voice to skull, but not everyone is the same. They target people in different ways. What are some of the other hints or symptoms that you might be targeted, Derrick?
Okay. The voices is one of the electronic harassment modalities. And for those that experience severe electronic harassment, there are things like burning on their skin, their eyes, sometimes their vision gets blurry. There is memory loss. There are headaches. There is forced speech. People are forced to say words that they don't mean to say. There are nosebleeds, breathing difficulties, even heart arrhythmias or heart attacks. They're able to induce really serious, physical conditions. Muscle cramps are also a very common symptom, as well as joint pains. There's a lot of ways that they can remotely influence a person physically. So to some extreme extent, in some cases, there are people that are hospitalized every year with very serious conditions, and in very rare cases, but in a few instances, people do pass away. We had a rash of people last year at the beginning of 2018 who passed away due to their severe attacks. So it does happen. It is rare, but some people do succumb to their injuries. So these are very serious assaults that happen to those that are really afflicted with electronic harassment. So it's really important that we bring this to the public's attention.
What about the use of implants in order to, for example, take over so that they can see through your eyes, so they see what you're seeing? How is that accomplished?
Well, I guess there's a variety of ways that can happen. And there's various theories about how that occurs, whether it's by implants. Nowadays, they don't really have to use implants, but we do find that some people are implanted. There are also nanotechnologies that are found in some people. And during the days when Melinda Kidder, who was a detective in Missouri, she was doing a lot of scanning sessions for those in our community. And she would discover these nanotechnologies that were riddled throughout people's bodies. She has since discontinued her service because of hassle and harassment that she was receiving from these shadowy types. I guess they're government. We presume that they're government for the most part. So she discontinued her service, but she was able to detect implants and also the nanotechnologies that affect our physical bodies.
And how about for you personally, Derrick? Do you have implants?
Well, actually, Richard, I was scanned back in 2011. There was a guy named Jesse Beltran who was crisscrossing the country, scanning people for microchips. And this was during a time where we were just kind of learning the ropes in terms of the equipment to use and so forth. And at that time it was free because all of this was kind of experimental on our part. So in my case, I was scanned and found to have about 6 or 7 microchips. One in my jaw, and in my forearm, on the back of my neck, and some other places I can't recall right now. But there are several places that were found to be emitting frequencies. And what was interesting was that he noted that the frequencies that he was picking up were military frequencies. So myself and one other person in the room at that time, we were both emitting, we were the only ones emitting military frequencies. So in my case, that was entirely appropriate.
And at what point in your life do you imagine they were able to implant these nano chips under your skin? Did you have elective surgery? Was it during a trip to the dentist? Do you have any idea?
Well, I thought about that myself, when I could have been implanted. And it could have been a dental visit. And that happened just before I left the service. One of the things they do besides the physical is a visit to the dentist. And it could have happened there. It could have been implanted or something. So possibly at that time, but I don't know specifically if I haven't had other operations or beyond that. So I'm not sure when exactly it could have happened.
Tell me more about forced speech. Does this affect you? Do you find yourself blurting out inappropriate things at inopportune times?
I've heard of that happening, but in my case, they're sometimes able to mess around with my speech, and sometimes I'm not as clear as I want to be. But as far as forcing me to say words that I don't mean to say, that has not happened to me.
And what about heart arrhythmia for you?
There have been actually a couple of attempts that I feel were attempts to give me a heart attack. And fortunately, it didn't get to that point, but I could feel that they were trying to induce something like that. And this is something they're entirely capable of inducing, and it just happens several times a year to people, having heart attacks and really severe. I do know a friend of mine, that is now suffering from an induced stroke. She was basically attacked. She saw this car. She was walking out of work, and she saw this car that was kind of going by, and then she suddenly felt some type of energy overtake her body, and she fell to the ground. And she was rushed to the hospital, and she had some type of induced stroke. So they do have these portable devices that can induce a range of really horrendous physical symptoms. So this is a really serious situation for a lot of people.
I'm guessing then if they wanted to kill someone remotely with a heart attack or a stroke, they could do that. Are they at that point?
Yes, and it happens sometimes. I'm trying to think of a specific incident where that happened, like instantaneously. But in most cases, it's over a period of time that people, survive attack after attack, and it just kind of wears their body down to a point where the body just gives out. And a few people pass away each year because of this slow kill effect.
And how about now that you've become a spokesperson? Here you are, you're executive director for PACTS, People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance International. You speak on the radio, you speak on television, at public events. Has that, because you're now raising awareness, has that caused them to intensify their attacks against you?
At times. When I did the Coast to Coast interview, there were reprisals afterwards, and I lost family members. I've not been on Coast to Coast since that time, but there hasn't been. Coast to Coast has such a huge following.
Right. Listen, I've
that
got
kind
to, sorry, the music's coming on here. We've got to take a quick time out. We'll follow up on that point when we come back. Derrick Robinson, Executive Director of PACTS International, back with more on electronic harassment and torture when The Conspiracy Show returns. My name is Richard Syrett.
This is no place for the naive or the faint-hearted. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Just finished my...
Iconic label, iconic artists. Celebrate Motown this month with these great releases on sale now at Sunrise Records.
Where there's smoke, there's The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
All right, welcome back. Derrick Robinson stays with us for the full 2 hours as we continue to delve into electronic torture and harassment, electronic surveillance, remote neural monitoring, voice-to-skull technology. He is the executive director of a support group for targeted individuals, a growing community as more people are waking up to this horrible targeting. And it's PACTS International, People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance. And we were in the middle of talking about how or whether you're being targeted more since you've become sort of a public figure in this regard. And you said that when you do coast to coast, obviously a huge platform, what happens after you do coast, for example? Will the voice to skull sort of ramp up, or how else are they targeting you?
Sometimes they make threats before I would do something like in a major market like coast to coast. But I don't do those very often, so that really is not an issue much.
So tell me about PACTS. How did it form? When did it form? How many members, etc.?
Okay. Well, we formed officially in January of 2016. We currently have about 2,000 that are on my email list that I correspond with on a regular basis. Basically, our mission is to the targeted individual community to help those who are being affected by electronic harassment and organized stalking. And we have basically become a haven for those who are experiencing the stalking and harassment and have nowhere else to turn, who are victimized by microwave weapons and directed energy weapons, as well as the organized stalking. We have a number of professionals even in our community. We have doctors, attorneys, engineers, scientists, psychologists, authors. We deal with city council officials. And we even deal, well, lately I've been in correspondence with someone from the House Judiciary Committee. So even those in Congress, and I hear that there's some Congress members that are also targeted. We have conference calls. Our organization has calls on Saturday night and Monday night. This is our podcast. And let's see, basically our mission is threefold. It is networking and support for victim survivors, advocacy of our issues to elected officials, and outreach to the media and the general public. Those are our three areas that we focus on. I would say that we have made lots of progress since we first started out in 2005. It's been increasing year by year. And it seems like the last couple of years, the progress has made a market. We've made some tremendous progress in the past couple of years, particularly since the news story happened, as I mentioned earlier, about the diplomats in Cuba and China. That has really exponentially increased our issues and brought them basically front and center to the American public. They're basically the mainstream news is basically starting to speak energy, the directed energy weapons or microwave weapons. If we had sent those terms to the public a couple of years ago, they would not have been understood, nor would they have been believed. But now we are hearing these terms from hospital personnel, doctors, scientists, and so forth, who are actually concluding that these diplomats were attacked with directed energy weapons or microwave weapons. So that is basically paving the way for us to be taken seriously in terms of being victimized by these weapons. So as this story continues to develop in the news, I think that at some point our issues will be grafted in, and I think that would dynamically change the paradigm of our targeting.
Have any, and these were embassy staff from Canada, even Canada, the United States, in Cuba, and China, I believe, as well. Have any family members, anyone involved in those embassies, and that have been affected by this, have any of those people reached out to you?
They have not, basically, and it may have to do with the fact that they are under a gag order not to talk to the press at this time. So we haven't heard from them, although at some point we may. So we'll see what happens with that. In the meantime, we have made contact with one of the doctors at the University of Miami.
Derrick, just hold on to that point. Excuse the interruption. We'll pick up on that point when we come back. Derrick Robinson, Executive Director of PACTS International, Targeted Individuals on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
Providing the evidence and letting you draw your own conclusions. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Come from away is the joyous, foot-stomping, and heart...
best diet with practical tips for mindful living. As winter sets in, why not stay in and work out with One TV? Now in free preview for all Bell TV subscribers at channel 1606. To celebrate Zoomer Magazine's 10th anniversary, we went on the hunt for Zoomers who really know how to Zoom. We approached Canadian organizations, found our Zoomers, and narrowed it down to 10 notable nominees. Now it's your turn to vote for your ultimate Zoomer. Read their stories at ultimatezoomer.com. Vote for your favorite, and you could win a 2-night hotel stay at select Fairmonts around the world, plus a $200 Visa gift card. Visit ultimatezoomer.com now for details.
Peering into the shadows where the truth often hides. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
All right, welcome back. Derrick Robinson, targeted individuals. And just before the break, I interrupted you. We were talking about whether or not embassy staff that have been affected by what appears to be microwave weaponry in Cuba, whether any of them have reached out to you. And you were about to tell me about a doctor in Miami. Do we have Derrick? Are you there, Derrick?
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
The doctor in Miami that examined the diplomats, his name is Dr. Michael Hoffer, I believe his name is. He recently did a news conference with some of his colleagues and explaining what exactly they did when they came to see the diplomats came to see him. And he began to use terms like directed energy weapons or microwave weapons. They were openly using those terms that we use all the time in the community. And this is to the mainstream press. So it seemed, and he also mentioned that he had been getting calls from all over the world from people who had been suffering similarly. So several members of our community contacted him and were well received by his office and have appointments to see him late this month and early next month. So we'll see what happens with that, with those contacts with his office, and see, how he, plans to deal with targeted individuals that might come to visit him. So this could be very significant for our cause. So this is really a very important avenue that could promote our issues, especially if we get acceptance by the medical community, because our relationship with the medical community up to this time has been very adversarial for some reason. And they have basically labeled many in our community as delusional. So many, a certain percentage of our community have that label. But because of these events that have happened, all that could change with the medical community realizing and accepting the technologies that can affect a person remotely. And that taking into consideration, we could now speak to police, we could talk to hospital personnel potentially about microwave weapons, and we'll be believed. So a lot is really at stake at this particular moment.
What was happening with the embassy staff? What sort of symptoms, for those not familiar with the story, how were they being affected in the embassy in Havana?
Well, a lot of the symptoms that they were experiencing kind of mirrored the things that many in our community are experiencing. The headache, the loss of balance, the memory loss, cognitive issues, nosebleed, and I think there was something about heart arrhythmias. I'm not sure about that, but a list of symptoms that kind of matched the things that we are experiencing. Sleep deprivation is very common in our community. I think that was one of the things they were also experiencing, as well as certain sounds, that they were hearing many in our communities experience that as well. So a lot of things paralleled with diplomats were experiencing and still are. Some are still experiencing those symptoms. They parallel the things that we are also experiencing. So we're going to see if we can also be recognized as victims of directed energy weapons and microwave weapons, and therefore start to receive some assistance and recognition for this issue.
You mentioned that someone from the U.S. House Judiciary Committee had reached out to you.
Yeah.
Can you tell me when this happened and why and what was discussed?
Basically, this happened a couple of months ago. And this is an individual that is in office. She works in the office, I believe, and the Judiciary Committee, the committee office. And I was astonished. I asked her what type of work she did. She lived in D.C. I asked her what she did, and she told me she worked in the Judiciary Committee. And I was astonished at first.
So this is not a congressman, or a congresswoman. This is a staff member who works for a congressman who's on the Judiciary Committee.
Exactly. And,
okay.
But I also understand that it's rumored. I really cannot verify this, but there are rumors that some actual Congress members are victimized as well. But we've heard that all along, basically, from the very beginning. We were told that there were some in Congress who were also victimized by this technology. To what extent, I'm not sure, because we haven't spoken directly to them.
How readily available is this technology? I mean, if it's just sort of rejigging a microwave oven. So, for example, if someone in the apartment next to you, and again, a lot of this information is available online, the technology, the crude, more rudimentary technology is available online. Could anybody with the means and the wherewithal have access to this technology? Or are we talking about really sort of top level, black ops?
Well, we are talking about black ops, in my opinion, and some really advanced technologies that could create just unbelievable effects on the human body. Although, at the same time, I've seen on YouTube videos where people demonstrate that they can take a microwave oven and create a directed energy weapon from it.
Right.
So that is possible for a layperson to create some type of a microwave weapon, just from their microwave oven. So that is possible.
I mentioned that because one of the people that I interviewed for, and you may recall her name, she was in the same episode that you were in. I went to New York City. I met this woman who lived in an apartment. I believe it was on the Lower East Side, if memory serves, and it was a lovely apartment, but it was rent controlled, and she believed that someone living beside her or above her or below her was targeting her. They wanted her out of the apartment because they wanted a family member to move in or something like that. In other words, this was not sort of someone in a government agency doing this. This was someone who maybe they just wanted her out for personal reasons.
Right. We have found that this technology has gotten into the hands of the private sector as well. And there's all kinds of agendas that are going on. People that have vendettas against an individual for one reason or another have access to these microwave weapons. And they're just now becoming known to the public. We've known about them, of course, for years. But But yeah, there are those that have their own private agendas that are using this technology to cause suffering to, regular citizens.
What about organized crime? Are they using it?
Again, we suspect that they are. There are some members in our community that feel that they are being victimized by organized crime, the mafia, or whatever. And it seems that these criminal groups have access to this technology, whether it be drug rings, sex rings, organized crime, all of those types, these criminal types, seem to have access to this weaponry. I believe it is because of those, the shadowy elements of our government that kind of are in contact with shadowy elements of our society, and they kind of work hand in glove. So it's not surprising that these individuals will also have access to this technology.
Derrick, we're coming up on the top of the hour, and we'll break. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines and take questions and comments. Hopefully, we'll hear from some targeted individuals. Just in the few moments before the break, let me ask you, do you have a handle on how many North Americans, let's say, may be targeted individuals based on the data that you've collected thus far?
Actually, we have some pretty good estimates of victims, and I would say probably in the United States, and that would be about 1 to 2 million victims.
1 to 2 million?
Yeah, 1 to 2 million. I think that's a pretty accurate estimate. And that was actually given to us by someone who was a whistleblower who presented himself to our community a couple of years ago as having worked for a security firm that was targeting individuals in the Seattle area.
Well, listen, we'll, I want to talk about that individual, that whistleblower, when we come back. On the other side, Derrick Robinson stays with us for hour 2 on targeted individuals right here on The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
CFZM FM and CFZM AM. Owned and operated by MZ Media Incorporated.
From Toronto, Canada, Earth, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Hey, thanks for inviting me into your home, long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' basement, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Derrick Robinson, the executive director of People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance International, stays with us this hour as we continue to discuss electronic harassment, mind control, targeted individuals, and we'll also open up the phone lines for questions and comments this hour. And I would love to hear from people who believe they are being targeted for electronic torture and surveillance. Let me give you those numbers now. In the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, 416-360-0740. Again, in the GTA, 416-360-0740. And toll free from just about anywhere, 1-866-740-4740. 1-866-740-4740. Now, before we get back to Derrick Robinson, a quick programming note. Next week on The Conspiracy Show, Nicola Lonchar from the Tesla Science Foundation will be here for 2 hours discussing the remarkable work of Nikola Tesla. And just a reminder to check out my podcast, Conspiracy Unlimited. New episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Conspiracy Unlimited. Listen and subscribe at conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com. And if you'd like to support our work here at Strange Planet, please consider becoming an official donor at patreon.com/Strange Planet. All right, back to Derrick Robinson, Executive Director of People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance. Before we go any further, Derrick, how do people get in touch with you at PACTS?
And they can write to us at our email. Well, first let me give our website, which is www.pactsntl.org. That is PACTS, P-A-C-T-S, N like Nancy, T like Tom, L like Larry.org. Our contact number is 1-888-559. 639-5559. That's 1-888-639-5559.
All right. And you mentioned again that you have something like, is it 2,000 members, and you meet how often online?
We have conference calls that we meet on. We have conference calls on Saturday night and on Monday night. And the conference call schedule, there are other conference calls in the community, and those schedules are posted at our website. I also need to give my our email address, which is info@pactsntl.org.
PACTS, N as in Nancy, T as in Tom, L as in Larry. What does the NTL stand for?
Basically, our name, which is People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance International.
Ah, okay. So the NTL is the short form for international. Got it. Okay. Now, before the break at the top of the hour, Derrick, you were telling me about detailed information you had about the number of targeted individuals in the United States, and you said somewhere between 1 and 2 million, which is astounding. But you said that information came to you from a reliable source, a whistleblower. Tell me more about this person.
Okay. It was the summer of 2016 was when a guy by the name of Brian Coffin started to contact certain individuals in our community. And he finally got around to contacting me, and I did an interview with him. Quite fascinating, the information I felt that he provided in terms of insights into how people are targeted. He works for a security firm, and something I really hadn't thought of as a place where there's a repository of individuals that target people. So there was equipment there, and people worked shifts where they they did the torture, they did the stalking, all that remotely, and so he was a witness to all of that. So we got some insights from him as far as how people are targeted, who is being targeted, and why. He believes that it's a social engineering agenda that is happening. And basically in the Seattle area, he believes that particularly homeless men are being targeted. And there is general population control activities going on in certain sectors of the city. He believes that people are being bused into Seattle for this mind control experimentation that is happening, and for this social control paradigm that is happening there in the Seattle area. So it was quite eye-opening. And actually, the interview can be found online that we did with him. And he ran into some issues with certain people in the community, and he ended up being estranged from us. But while he was with us, he gave us some really valuable insights, I felt, into the inner workings of one part of the targeting paradigm.
You mentioned that they were, you mentioned they were busing, he mentioned they were busing people into the Seattle area as part of this experiment, if you will. What was the purpose of busing people in? Were they taking part in the street theater? In other words, they were doing the harassing, or were the people being bussed in the victims?
They were brought in as victims. I believe they were being deposited at the homeless shelter that was right across the street from this security firm where he worked. And they were being observed by these individuals and experimented on. They were experimenting on with the technology on this homeless population in Seattle. They were seeing, how they can control people, what they can control them with, and you can actually see a marked difference between the areas that were being targeted and those that weren't. Moods were being affected, activities were being affected by these technologies, and it was quite astonishing to see this in action, from his perspective, as he was sharing with us.
In your experience, Derrick, do you find that people who already have an underlying mental illness, or who may have some sort of a substance abuse problem, may be targeted because, in the eyes of certain people, because of their mental health issue or their addiction, there is already a credibility issue? So in other words, if you target those individuals, no one's going to believe them anyway.
Well, yeah, those mental patients, drug abusers have always been on the forefront of human experimentation, and so it is with this program.
And what do you say to people, the skeptics out there, and there may be some listening, no doubt, who would say, well, perhaps Derrick has some underlying mental illness. Maybe he is delusional. Maybe all of these members of his group are delusional. How do you respond to what many people, no doubt, are thinking?
Well, there are always going to be skeptics, especially when you talk about new technology. But the targeters, they have basically selected a range of people to experiment with. Remember, this is basically a societal control paradigm, and they're looking at all sectors of society, all walks of life. The entire human spectrum is represented in these in the targeting program, from the rich to the very poor, all races and ethnicities, straight, gay, you name it. Every demographic is represented in this targeting, because they want to ultimately control every area of society. So you're going to find all kinds of demographics in our group that reflect that. So for those that, and which includes those that have mental illnesses as well, and there's a certain percentage of that actually in our community, as well as those who are mentally very, very gifted. And I believe one of the experiments with this program is to see if they could take someone with a genius mentality and break them down to someone that has no mental skills whatsoever. And there are some in our community that have come from way, way high with mental acuity and are struggling just to make your basic, just trying to make it through the day. They have been so compromised with their mental ability. So I think that there is that experimentation going on. To what extent can they take someone and alter their humanity, whatever their skills might be, into something completely different? So I see that a lot. They try to change sexuality. They try to change personality. If you're straight, sometimes they try to make you gay. If you're gay, they try to make you straight. It's all kinds of experimentation at various levels. And all of this is remote, all of this is hidden, and totally deniable.
I would imagine also if someone had undergone decades of electronic harassment and torture and surveillance, that unless you have an incredible will, even if you have an incredible will, you're going to probably have some underlying mental health issues. How could you not after 30 years of torture?
That is true. However, it depends upon the extent to which you have been attacked. There are some that are severely, severely attacked, and you wonder how they make it from one day to the next, and they wonder as well, but they are holding up. And then there's those that are maybe experiencing some stalking and harassment issues. So it just depends upon how severe, the harassment is. But you're right, after a period of time, physically and mentally.
We have a call here. Stephen is in the Parkdale neighborhood of Toronto, and he wants to get on here and talk to you. Go ahead, Stephen. Welcome to the Conspiracy Show.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how much you think maybe these are rogue agents from NSA, maybe working for something like Halliburton and implementing it for like guys like Dick Cheney or whatever.
All right. The National Security Agency, Derrick, you mentioned, the Defense Department. Do we have any idea where these perps are?
Well, I believe it is Department of Defense. In my case, it definitely is. I was at NSA when all this started. I was a witness firsthand that this is coming from the Department of Defense. NSA is comprised of all of the military services, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, and Army. They're all there. All the services are there. NSA is run by the military. So there's that component. There's also the CIA, I believe, is involved in the experimentation.
Would this all be off budget, though, wouldn't it? I mean, you're not going to find a paper trail. You're not going to find a letterhead with the program on there, are you? Or is it possible that there's a document somewhere waiting to be unearthed that would provide a paper trail?
Okay, we do have one declassified document that seems to indicate that the DoD has been experimenting with voice to skull and some other mind control technologies. And this was brought forth by a member of our community in a lawsuit, and he made a FOIA request. And actually, the Army at Fort Meade declassified one of their documents called the bioeffects of, let's see if I can, selected effects of non-lethal weapon, the bioeffects of non-lethal weapon. And within that document, they do speak of the possibility of using voices that could disturb one's mentality. So this, that document is basically one shining example of that has been declassified that indicates that the DoD has been experimenting in this area, as well as the work of Dr. Joseph Sharp, who was a psychologist at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. His work has been published, and he was actually the first one to successfully experiment with voice to skull. And his experiments with his assistant Mark Grove is published in a psychological trade magazine. That was back in 1975. So there is evidence that the DoD has been that, and also Jose Delgado, his work.
Right. Going back to the 50s, 1950s.
Right, and he actually wrote a book about his work, Physical Control of the Human Mind, where he details his work, his experiments with remote control of a human being. First, he started out with cats and monkeys and a bull.
Charging bulls. He could make a charging bull stop in its tracks.
Right. So it was all done by radio frequencies. At the turn of a dial, he could produce these effects. And first on animals, and then he was able to also successfully do that, repeat that experiment on human beings. He was able to control their movements and their moods to an extent. So, and he could produce all kinds of emotions, from rage to anxiety to fear to lust, happiness, a range of human emotions just by the frequency he was projecting at someone. So his work is well documented, and this was back in the 50s he was able to do this.
That was 60 years ago. Imagine in 60 years what they can do now.
Right.
So you don't
have
think
this.
it's a role like
Halliburton. Sorry, Stephen jumped in again. So Halliburton, he mentioned this defense contractor.
I'm not sure if that particular contractor is involved in our targeting. There have been, there is one report that Lockheed Martin might be involved, Raytheon, some of the other defense contractors, SAIC perhaps. I'm not sure, I haven't heard about Halliburton.
All right, Stephen, thank you for that. You mentioned Raytheon. I know of an entire family out on the West Coast who have been targeted, and he's an ex-employee of Raytheon. All right, we'll take a quick time out, come back, and take some more calls and much more to discuss with Derrick Robinson of PACTS International as we continue to discuss mind control, electronic harassment, and targeted individuals right here on The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. Please stay with us.
Big Brother is listening, and so are you, to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To speak with Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free 1-866-740-4740.
To celebrate Zoomer Magazine's 10th anniversary, we went on the hunt for Zoomers who really know how to Zoom. We approached Canadian organizations, found our Zoomers, and narrowed it down to 10 notable nominees. Now it's your turn to vote for
downsizing or selling a large collection of anything? Talk to Paul and Bogart, the experts at Toronto Gold, Silver, and Coins. Call 905-737-GOLD or visit torontogoldsilver.com.
Join us for new episodes of Just Like Mom and Dad on Yes TV.
Just Like Mom and Dad is Canada's new favorite game show.
The show where we see just how well kids and parents really know each other.
For a chance at the ultimate spin and the ultimate win.
Does your mom embarrass you often? Sometimes.
Missed an episode? No problem. Stream episodes on demand at yestv.com/JLMAD.
Let's play Just Like Mom and Dad.
Just Like Mom and Dad. Back-to-back episodes Saturdays at 8 on Yes TV and streaming on demand at yestv.com.
If you're paying any attention at all, the moves in the stock market should be telling you something. What if we have another big correction? Online Trading Academy can teach you how to create additional income and how to save for your retirement. Attend a free half-day class and learn how you can make money in any market condition. Call 888-670-TRADE, 888-670-TRADE, or torontoclass.com. 888-670-TRADE or torontoclass.com.
PIN numbers, passcodes, social insurance numbers. If they make you wonder how private they are, here's two more numbers. 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
All right, welcome back. Derrick Robinson stays with us. Targeted Individuals. He is one such, and also he is the executive director of PACTS International, People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance. And let's go to the phones again. Logan is here in Toronto. Logan, good evening, good morning, and welcome to The Conspiracy Show. Hi, Logan.
Hello.
Are you there? Hi there. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hello, Richard.
Yes.
Okay, it's William, not Logan. Okay. I agree with what your guest says, and with all of it, and I'd like to add a little bit more. These are mind control experiments that Dr. Ewan Cameron was doing from 1947 to 1967 at McGill University in Montreal. There's a real good Fifth Estate documentary on this. And he was funded and financed by the CIA because they were doing the same experimentation, and he was much further ahead than they were.
Well, they were using it. He was using LSD, and these were unsuspecting women who were treated at Allen Memorial Hospital in Montreal, basically for what was postpartum depression. And many of them, well, wait a minute. No, that was ostensibly what they were in there for. And they had, I'm quite familiar with this particular chapter in history. They were doused with LSD, and many of them had their memories wiped clean, and there were class action suits, and they won. They received a court settlement.
Okay, so let's go. I interpret it differently, but let's go along with what you said. So they received court settlements. The courts in 1970s, I think, ruled, in the early 1970s, ruled that mind experimentation is illegal and it cannot be done in any way, shape, or form. And it is still being done, and there's precedent cases on it. And the lawyers that did this case were Alan Stein lawyers from Montreal, and they still do cases with victims. Just last year, they got a settlement for $100,000. These people don't want to be exposed, so they'll pay up if you've got the right lawyers and the right circumstances to get some money out of them. And I would like to add that I think this is, it seems to me that this is demonic psychic attack as usual, with technology now added to it. And I don't think there's nothing new about it except for the technology and aspect of it. And the gang stalking and the brown-noser perps, agitators, provocateurs, whatever you want to call them. There's nothing new about gang stalking either. You can read, it's just historically documented. You can start with the Catholic Encyclopedia as a good starting point. They can tell you a lot about it.
All right, Logan, you raise a good point. I just want to move along here, but thank you for the call. I want to ask Derrick about something you raised, and that has to do with these court cases. Can you cite some recent court cases where the plaintiff has been given a settlement, or there have been criminal prosecutions? Do you have any examples of that, Derrick?
We have a few cases where our community members have prevailed. Richard King, for example, in California, he was able to win his case. So I hear, actually he told me that personally, directly. He had two cases. One, he was suing a hospital for implanting him and his children. And he did state to me that he won that case, and also it was a case against the government that he won. Richard happens to be someone who went to law school. He's not an attorney as yet, but he knew what he was doing. He knows his way around the courtroom, and of course that helps infinitely if you're going to court, if you know how to navigate the legal system. In his case, he did, and he had some attorneys that also knew what they were doing, and he prevailed. He is still actually being targeted, though. Just because you win a court case does not mean that you stop being targeted. It just means that you get money.
And who was named as the defendant in these cases?
Well, in his private suit, it was the hospital that implanted him and his children. And then there was also a suit against the government that he won. I'm not sure exactly what part of the government. He can only tell me so much when I talk to him. So after prevailing in court, sometimes it's difficult to get specific information from those that win, but I was able to at least determine that he won both of his lawsuits. And then also I discovered that he is still trying to get free of the targeting. So that's one thing I learned about going to court. Just because you win the lawsuit and you get money, it doesn't mean that your targeting will stop.
Right. Okay, I want to go to the live chat here on the YouTube stream, and we have a number of questions here. Let's see here. Let's start with Jim Sharp. He's asking, if you've been dealing with this high-tech torture for almost 40 years, how do you lead a balanced life, Derrick? It's a good question, Jim.
Well, in my case, I'm doing okay. The torture doesn't affect me as some others who have extreme cases of torture and electronic harassment. My situation consists of the stalking, for the most part, stalking and harassment, where they affect every area of your private life and try to manipulate things. I also receive the voices, and they can read my thoughts, and they can hear what I hear, see what I see. It makes life a little bit complicated when you make plans, because they know what your plans are going to be, and sometimes they go so far as to interfere with your plan. So it makes it difficult sometimes if you're planning something, especially in a business environment and where secrecy is important. So I've been doing okay, but I've been trying to help those that have severe physical issues with very little remedy for what they're experiencing, and that's what I have been trying to help. Those are the individuals I have been trying to help for the most part.
Well, that's a good time now then to bring up Pyramid 7's question, and Pyramid 7 asks, what are your thoughts on counter surveillance? So maybe now would be a good time to talk about countermeasures. How can you let's say, ameliorate this harassment and torture?
Okay. There are some basic things that people do to get relief, and that is using some really basic materials like leather, which obstructs the microwave weapons, metallic, metal material objects also offer some protection from the microwave weapons. Mylar offers some protection from the microwave weapons. Those are basic materials that will protect you for a certain period of time until they ramp up the targeting. Most of the things that people try work for a period of time, but it seems that the tormentors always find a way around it. So people are constantly having to find new ways to protect themselves from the frequencies. So it's been a challenge for some in our community to stay comfortable.
Jim, let's see, who is it here? Alice. Alice is next. Alice asks, why isn't the government targeting America's adversaries with this technology? And if they are, why aren't they affected by targeting? I'm not sure who they mean by they. In other words, are we targeting, is this being used as a weapon on foreign combatants, enemy combatants, for example?
Probably so, but I would have no way of knowing that.
All right, we'll go back to the phones. Jim is also in Toronto. Jim, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Richard. Good to be on your show.
Welcome aboard.
I've been following. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, what was that?
I just said welcome aboard.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've been following. I guess you're familiar. You did have Michael Sallon, was it, on about the Q post and QAnon?
Yes.
And back in July of this summer, that topic got brought up about how some of these shooting incidences, false flag shooting incidents, have actually been driven by some rogue CIA operations. And they brought up the case of Jared Ramos, who back in August, he was the 38-year-old Laurel man who was charged with killing 5 people at the Capital Gazette.
Right.
But, so what Q has stated is that Gina Haspel, if you look at some of the Q drops, actually they were they started around 1629, that Gina Haspel was recruited specifically, and she was missioned and tasked to break apart these programs, and it states that in the Q drops.
Okay, just because we're up against a break here, Jim, let me just get Derrick to respond to that. Did you have any comment on that, Derrick, before we head into the break?
Okay, we do have a number of individuals that we have actually come in contact with that have interfaced with our community that were actual shooters. And the most well-known of those would be Aaron Alexis. This is the individual that shot up the Washington Navy Yard a few years ago. People tend to remember that. That was a case where the FBI, because of that became, national headlines, and people were very concerned about the military installation being attacked. The FBI actually got involved in that case, and I was interviewed because Aaron Alexis actually contacted our organization prior to his shooting. He was actually asking for help. He discovered our site. At that time, it was Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. And he was looking for some assistance with his targeting. He wanted to meet some people in the area.
Listen, let's take a time out here quickly, Derrick. We'll come back and we'll finish up on that point. This is important. Let's get back to it. All right, the Conspiracy Show continues right after this.
Fasten your seatbelt and put your tray in the upright position. You're about to leave everything you know behind on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
And I'm Wally of the Naz and Wally Sports Hour.
local Ford store or Ford.ca.
Loose lips sink ships, and sometimes corporations. Got something to say? Call Richard Syrett now at 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
Welcome back. Derrick, we were talking about the shooter, Ramos. In fact, he carved on his weapon, I think he said my EMF weapon. He believed he was being remote.
Aaron Alexis, yeah, he actually carved on his rifle my ELF weapon. And he decided, he sought help from us at first. He wanted to contact people in the area, but he didn't want to talk over the telephone. He wanted people's addresses so that he could correspond with them by mail, which, I didn't feel comfortable giving out people's addresses. And so he declined further contact. And then 2 weeks later on the news, we hear that he had walked into the Washington Navy Yard and shot and killed 12 people. And he himself was killed in the ordeal. So there are those that feel that is the way out of this. And I believe that there is possibly manipulation going on there to bring them to that self-destructive act. They're always trying to bring us to some manner of self-destruction. So, yeah, I believe that was part of it.
So, in other words, he wasn't necessarily being programmed to do this, but he felt this was his only way out of this torture, out of this agony and torture?
Well, I believe that he was probably influenced to believe that was the only way out of this for him. So they're very active also subliminally, and not only is the technology able to send voices, but it's able to send subliminal thoughts and messages to an individual, just as Jose Delgado was able to project emotion and feeling. The technology can also do likewise. It can project emotions to a person. It can also project subliminal thoughts. The Russians had a device a few years ago called the LIDA machine that it sold to the United States. And this device also had that capability. And that's something that people can look up online. And by Russian standards, it was a crude device. It was given to the United States, made available to them in the 80s. And it could hypnotize a person. It could hypnotize an entire auditorium full of people. It could produce light and heat, as well as subliminal messages. So that was a rudimentary mind control device, and this was back in the 80s. And nowadays they have obviously much more sophisticated technology that they're using.
Earlier in the program, Derrick, you mentioned that a staff member on the U.S. House Judiciary Committee had contacted you. Had this person hinted at the possibility there might be, at some point, an inquiry, a committee meeting, legislation, anything like that?
That would be possible, but the way Congress works is that she would need a number of her colleagues that would also be in alignment with her, as well as their representatives that could bring legislation and somehow influence their colleagues to vote for this legislation. Now, Congress has tried to address this issue actually a couple of times in the past.
Dennis Kucinich, who was your congressman, I believe, was he not?
He was a representative for the House. He was in a different district in the Cleveland area. I was in Cincinnati. But in 2001, he brought the Space-Based Weapons Act that would have, if it had passed, it would have actually banned the weaponry that is affecting us. It would have banned all these space-based platforms that affect human beings on the Earth. So that legislation was sent to committee and never saw the light of day. And the same thing happened with John Glenn's bill, which had it was basically the Human Protection Act. It would have given protections for those who felt that they were being victimized by government, some type of government research program that they felt that had gone awry. It would have required the agencies to respond to those that file complaints. It would also have given us a place where we could file complaints if we felt that we were being victimized by an agency who was experimenting upon it. That legislation also got sent to committee and never saw the light of day. So it's for Congress to pass legislation like that, it is really going to require a tremendous amount of public support because it's extremely political. The Department of Defense lobby would be against it, and they would have huge obstacles to overcome before something like that would pass. And as long as the public is unaware of it, as long as legislators are basically unaware of this technology and this issue, there's really not a chance.
Okay, Derrick, we got to take a quick timeout. We'll come back and finish up with Derrick Robinson, targeted individuals on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
The owners of the system are asleep. Now we can play The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Right now, receive up to a $5,000.
Hey friends, don't know if you heard the news, but the good people at YouTube arbitrarily decided to demonetize my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. Now, they claim that we are re-uploading content that doesn't belong to us, which is entirely false. I own The Conspiracy Show. Of course, I own Conspiracy Unlimited, and I own the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone. And all of those and this radio show can be found on the YouTube channel. Now, we are reapplying for reinstatement in about 30 days. I'm not sure if we'll prevail. Something tells me we won't. It seems as if YouTube is targeting programs like mine. However, I need now your support more than ever. We've taken a big financial hit by losing the monetization on YouTube. So now I need your help more than ever. I hope you'll consider becoming an official supporter of The Conspiracy Show, the YouTube channel, and my podcast, Conspiracy Unlimited. Here's what you need to do. Go to patreon.com.
Derrick, again, for people out there listening who may suspect they are targeted individuals or believe sincerely that they are, how do they get in touch with People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance International?
Okay, there's a couple of ways. We do have a contact line, and that is 1-888-639-5559. We also have an email address, info@PACTS, that is PACTS, N like Nancy, T like Tom, L like Larry.org, and which is similar to our website, which is www.paxntl.org.
Do any of these technologies work in concert with HAARP, for example?
Well, that is a good question. There was suspicion of that a while back. I really have not heard much about HAARP lately. Actually, that was presented on Jesse Ventura's show. He talked about HAARP, and it has in its mind control capability. And it is supposedly it can target an individual as well as groups of individuals and people over wide geographical areas. Reportedly, they are denying that HARP, the people that work there, are denying that they are that HARP has mind control capabilities at all. But so that is a matter of debate in our community, and so supposedly, if you were to talk to Nick Bagich, he's written a couple of books about HARP, and he can explain to you exactly how the technology works. And he believes that HARP is targeting, our population in the United States as well as other portions of the world with the frequencies that it sends out there. Whether that is true, I cannot say for sure myself, but it's possible.
And how about chemtrails? How does your membership feel about the influence of chemtrails?
Okay, that is also controversial in our community, and there are some that are affected by the chemtrails that have contracted Morgellons disease that they feel is directly related to the chemtrails. And there's actually some remedies around for those that have Morgellons. It's a real insidious disease that people have really suffered with. But fortunately, some people have actually been able to deal with that effectively, the Morgellons that has resulted from the chemtrails. I think ultimately, if this continues, I mean, the residue from the chemtrails, of course, lands on everything. It's in the air, the water, the food supply, everything. So it affects all of humanity and all of animal and plant life. So this is an issue that ultimately the society is really going to have to deal with, because there are health consequences that have resulted from this. So I hope that is addressed.
Derrick, you mentioned that according to this whistleblower, somewhere between 1 and 2 million Americans are being targeted. I mean, are there plans, do you suspect, of ramping this up so that at some point we'll wake up and we'll all be targeted individuals?
I believe that is the agenda, that is the intention of the agenda. Even though, my feeling about that is that even though that is the intention, I do not necessarily feel that will actually happen.
And why is that?
Mainly because people are becoming more aware, and at some point there will be intervention and it will be stopped.
Well, that sounds like some good news, finally. So often when I speak about electronic harassment and mind control, it's not a rosy outlook. But you were saying, I think you mentioned earlier, within the next couple of years, there will be some type of intervention. What form would that intervention take? Would there be a I don't know, some piece of legislation? How is this going to be stopped?
Well, with widespread public awareness, if people realize what's at stake for them, I believe that cities, that states, that even Congress will act to defend not only our group, but their own lives. I mean, they are at risk. And as I stated, there are some even in Congress who are victims of this technology, but there's not a lot that even congressional representatives can do, not by themselves. For them to pass legislation, they're going to need the support of their colleagues, many of their colleagues. And right now, it's not political enough to pass Congress, so they're just silent at the moment. But if the public becomes aware, and they are becoming aware, and if this becomes a national issue, which I believe is entirely possible very soon, then this would change the dynamic of our targeting and of this issue. I think that there will be solutions at that time.
Do you have anyone in law enforcement that's a member of your organization?
There are some that are law enforcement, former law enforcement, that are working with us. Yeah.
And do they believe that they were targeted or are being targeted as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But just because they are members of law enforcement doesn't mean that they can stop the targeting from happening. I think the real what's really stopping this issue from being addressed is there really is not legislation on the books that specifically addresses it. So law enforcement has discretion basically to decide whether or not they'll help someone that is targeted. And even if they decide that they want to help them, there's only so much that they can do because they don't have the legal underpinning to arrest somebody for microwave harassment. The laws aren't there.
Who can you direct them to if they want their environment, their home, what have you, shielded to reduce the harassment and the electronic surveillance and so forth? I mean, many of us are familiar with Roger Tolsis from the Los Angeles area, Bug Sweep. He's very prominent, but obviously, Roger can't fly all over the place. Do you have resources available to people that you can direct them to someone who can provide countermeasures?
Okay, that is a tricky question. There are a number of individuals that make that claim. How effective they are is something else. And we have actually been in search of those who would have effective countermeasures. Lately, our group has been dealing with someone in Chicago. His name is Ed Lisinski, and he was actually featured in one of the television shows lately called Legend Hunter. They did a segment, they did an episode on mind control, and he was featured. And he is someone that some people in our community have went to, they've gone to him in the past for microwave harassment, and there has been mixed results with his services. So we're kind of in search of those that could really effectively deal with the frequencies and free people from their suffering. That is still a question mark as to who can effectively do that for our community. We're still in search of someone that can definitively do that.
All right. Well, Derrick, are there any conferences where targeted individuals can go and gather and meet other targeted individuals sort of face to face, or is it all done online for the most part?
We do have conferences occasionally. We hope to have a conference this year in the Los Angeles area. Most of our meetings have been via conference call. Although we do have support groups in some cities where they do meet face to face, and those are very good opportunities for networking and support. For those in Seattle is one area where there's a good support group there. Also in Portland, Oregon.
I guess if people should check the website for upcoming conferences and more news. Please quickly give us the website again.
It's PACTSNTL.org, PACTSNTL.org is our website.
PACTSNTL.org. Derrick, thank you so much for hanging out for 2 hours.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Derrick Robinson. My thanks to Ian, Ryan, and Albert. Back next week, we'll do 2 hours on Nikola Tesla. Until then, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light, what I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite, I'm coming home. Good night.
This is Zoomer Radio Toronto.
CFZM FM and CFZM AM.
Owned by MZ Media Incorporated.
The